Hello, and welcome to episode 20 of the Rain Check podcast. I'm Austin.
And I'm Donna. And
This
today we're
week,
talking about one of my favorite people.
that's true. And his name, as you will remember if you listened to last week's episode, is William the Conqueror.
Woohoo!
And this is our first two-part episode, and this is part two. So, obviously we
And
had to do it for William.
one of the reasons I'm so happy he conquered England is because I'm desperately trying to learn French, and it's helped along by the fact that so many English words have a French origin.
Good point.
Yeah.
All right, that's a good way. Yeah, that's very true.
So we
So,
ended last time with his victory, right, at Hastings and his crowning, his coronation at Christmas in London.
right. So he's coronated, and apparently, after he was coronated, he basically was trying to kind of reconcile all the native rulers and, make everything calm down a little bit. And the remaining earls were Edwin of Mercia, Morcar of Northumbria, and Waltheof of Northampton. And they got to keep their lands and titles. Waltheof was married to William's niece, Judith. And then there was a marriage between Edwin and one of William's daughters was proposed. This was also when Edgar the Eighthling got some lands. So I love he kind of pops up in this episode.
Constantly.
It's like we had a whole episode about him, but I like seeing his name. I always like seeing Edgar. And a lot of the, ecclesiastical offices, the bishops pretty much stayed the same, including Stigand, even though I think Stigand had some sort of like beef with the Pope or something, or that he wasn't seen as super legitimate. And
And this
but
was all William's effort to calm things and to
yeah,
try to assure the English that things weren't going to be that different under his rule than they had been under his nephew's rule, Edward the Confessor.
I feel like when you look at history, it's very rare you see a conqueror who fully replaces all the local leaders with his own guys and completely changes the culture. Like all the most successful conquerors, they always do a lot to let them keep their original culture and everything because then they'll be happier and they won't want to rebel. And but of course, Harold and his brothers lost their lands since they were a bit too much of their rivals. Since he was the former king, and a couple other people that had fought against William at Hastings lost their land. But by March of that year, so not too much later, he felt secure enough that he returned to Normandy, and he took with him Stigand, Morcar, Edwin, Edgar, and Waltheof. So seems a little risky to kind of take all your biggest earls with you across the water. But he did leave his half brother Odo, who was also the Bishop of Bayeux in charge of England, apparently all of England, along with another supporter, William Fitzosborne. And they also got some earldoms. And even though those are both Normans, he did apparently also keep a lot of the sheriffs were still Anglo-Saxon.
Yeah, and I think he kind of went on a victory tour across Normandy and showed off, almost a little bit like when the Roman emperors would come back to Rome after winning a battle, and they would parade through with someone holding that laurel over their head, and then they would have the captured king or something in a coach or something. I don't think that William treated his English subjects that poorly, but
True.
you know,
But it is funny because this is so long ago, we think of this as it very ancient, but to these kings, most of them were basically trying to mimic the Roman emperors in a lot of ways.
right.
So,
So
so
Matilda didn't follow, she wasn't there obviously when William went over to do the conquering. And when he did come back, as you said, to Normandy, he and Matilda had some fun together and conceived Adela, who we'll hear about next week.
so that's
And
right after he
yeah,
conquers. Okay.
yeah. So she was born within a year after that. And then I don't know if you have anything before 1068, but in 1068, when he went back to England,
Wait,
Matilda
yeah,
with him.
she went with him. Okay. I just have a tiny bit before that, just that
Sure.
um apparently, like, while he was in Normandy, yeah, like you said, he went on a victory tour. He, like, attended some consecrations of some churches, and his former ally, Eustace, actually kinda turned against him, and invaded at Dover, but he got pushed back, and, there's also some English resistance with this guy, Edric the Wild, who was attacking at Hereford, and there were revolts in Exeter, so revolts are popping up a little bit,
Yeah,
and
and Exeter is where, former King Harold's mother had fled to, so I think she was stoking the fires there.
Gaitha, she was sort of the rallying figure, I guess. So that would have been
Mhm.
interesting. Like, I wonder if they would have, if they had somehow succeeded, if she would have been queen, since that's
I
what it
don't
seems
know.
like if she's the focus. And they had Fitz Osborne and Otto. They trying their best, but they found it difficult to control everything, and they started building a bunch of castles. So I think that's important to remember when you think of the Normans. Think of castles. They really It's almost like if you imagine now, like in World War I, having fighter planes or, whatever the latest military technology. In this case, it's castles, and the knights help too, but did the English have knights at all? I mean, not really, right?
Yeah, but I don't think they fought on horseback. They formed those shield walls, you know?
True, true.
And they would ride, if they were wealthy enough, they would ride horses to battle, but they weren't, uh, trained or used to fighting on horseback, so that was an advantage that the Normans had along with, quickly built they were able to throw these I don't know how to pronounce it, but something like Moot and Bailey or Moat and Bailey castles together really quickly out of wood. They would build up a mound so it would be higher if there wasn't a natural hill in the area, put a moat around it, and then over time they would replace the wood with stone.
Interesting. Okay. Good to know. And yeah, just the last thing in 1067 was because of that rebellion in Exeter, William returned and besieged it. It held out for 18 days, but he did once again build a castle. Or sorry, after it fell, he then built a castle. Um, and Harold's sons were raiding in the southwest of England. They had a little base in Ireland, but they were defeated. And by Easter, William was at Winchester, where he was joined by his wife, Matilda.
Right,
And
and I'll just say that in Exeter, he let the, rebellion rebels off fairly easily. He did build that castle to keep a watch over them and to
right, right,
show his power, but he didn't, like, go around, hanging them from the castle walls or, taking off their noses and their arms and things like he had done in Normandy to some people. So I think he was trying to let them off easy in a way of trying to create peace and stop the rebellions that way.
I do have a question. I could wait till the end, but I am curious. So, you're a big William the Conqueror fan, obviously. But what do you think is his worst decision that he made? Something that you don't like?
Well, I mean, that's hard to say because I think what he did to the north that we'll talk about later was a horrible thing for anyone to do. And he regretted it on his deathbed. But but at the same time, I can kind of understand why he did that. It's like that we'll see, like when the kings are ruthless, like William ultimately is,
Mhm.
it does create a peace in the land because people realize they have to really toe the line or they'll be killed. And so it's if you're willing to live under the rules, at least you're living in peace.
Right, right.
At the same time, I don't think people should be horrible like that and should be,
Hmm.
killing and murdering people and starving them to death.
It is hard
S
to, it's always, I think, hard to put like 2026 or like 21st century morals like this far back because, if you were someone who wasn't trying to attack people and all this sort of thing, like you were probably going to get conquered by some. It's like you sort of had to be somewhat violent. It was just what level do you go to? to
Yeah, and I guess on another note, now that I think about it, I think what he did that was wrong was fall in love with his power so much that he couldn't give any of it to his heir, Robert.
yeah.
And he developed a almost like seems like a hatred of his son,
Well, it seems like
and
almost like a not really jealousy, but yeah, like, he felt like his son didn't deserve to take over,
exactly, and he insulted him, and so I think yeah, I think he was not a good father to Robert.
right? So, going back into the timeline, in 1068, Edwin and Morcar, I guess, rose in revolt, and they were also supported by the Earl of Northumbria. And some think that Edwin revolted because that proposed marriage between him and one of William's daughters did not take place. So he was upset about that. But also, there's like Fitz Osborne, and Fitz Osborne was getting really powerful. And so maybe they felt like the Normans were getting too powerful. And this is when William marches through Edwin's lands and builds Warwick Castle. So, building another castle. And that's, they submitted pretty quickly. He went on to New York, built a castle in New York, and Nottingham Castle, turned
The
south. He made three
is
more
I think
castles.
I think in York it's called the Clifford Tower, at least that's what it's called now, and when I was in York, I stayed in a hotel room directly across from there so I could view the tower, and some bad things happened to that in later years that had nothing to do with William, but yeah, so a lot of the castles that he built, including the White Tower of the Tower of London, are still around today for us to visit.
Here, I think I have the castle right
But yeah,
here.
yeah, that's it. That's Clifford Tower.
Yeah, I forgot to switch through the pictures. But um so yeah, he built a bunch of castles, and he what some of the people he put in charge of the castles were William Peverell and Harry du Beaumont. He went back to Normandy in late 1068, and then in about a year later, Edgar Atheling revolts and attacks York, which we already talked about.
So here's Edgar again. He's a constant
And
troublemaker,
I
to
know
be
he's a
honest, but he
troublemaker.
keeps being forgiven.
He's the Forrest Gump. He can't be killed. And yeah, so he goes to York, builds another castle, and then apparently the Danish King Sven, that's when he attacks England with his fleet at a couple different places. And apparently he actually did capture York. Edgar and Swen together captured York, and Edgar gets proclaimed king by his supporters. But William, he's kind of the best fighter, like best like warrior king England might have ever had. He was really good. So he goes up, he responds, and crushes that. And there was, even while there was another revolt in Maine in France. So he was doing, that's what's tricky with him, is he's one of the few kings where he has both England and a chunk of France.
Which again, he had previously called his son Robert Count of Maine, and Robert had done homage on behalf of the County of Maine. And so why not let Robert deal with Maine, right? And you've got your hands full dealing with the north of
Wow,
England, but
good
no.
point. Yeah, there is something about William where he doesn't seem very pleasant, or like, at least if you're his son, it's like, how do you really compete with that? It'd be like being the son of like Alexander the Great. You're like, okay, well,
Yeah.
I'm not really
I
gonna
think,
mess with him.
there are people that called him charismatic, and I think, he could be fun to be around in his milieu of his his soldiers and things
Yeah.
like that. Um, but yeah, but he also is not someone that you want to, have angry at you.
I almost kind of picture him as like Robert Baratheon in Game of Thrones. Like, he's a really good fighter and really kind of charismatic and can be cheerful, but could also be kind of really kind of lash out to his family and
Mhm.
stuff like that. And so then apparently he also did the classic English thing, and he bought off the Danes to have them leave. And so then this is when Edgar flees to Scotland and all that kind of stuff. And then William marches over the Pennines. I think that's like a mountain
I don't
range,
know.
in sort of like kind of between England and Scotland, maybe. And he defeats the remaining rebels at Shrewsbury. builds Chester and that. So this is when he I guess, builds Chester and Stafford castles, and this is actually the Herring of the North. So, do you want to say
Right.
more about that? We kind of said it earlier, but is there any?
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't like one of his normal battles where he defeats them and builds a castle, as we've been talking about. I mean, he did all that, but he was so angry because he was so tired of having to keep coming back and put down rebellions in the same area that he basically said, F this, I'm going to take care of this. And he was so angry, he just sent his men out all over the north to destroy everything, to kill the cattle, all the animals, to destroy the crops, to, I think, murder children, women, and farmers, and anyone and everything. I mean, some people say they salted the earth so crops couldn't
Yeah,
grow. I
that's
mean, it
another
was
Roman thing. Like
devastation.
it just sort of reminds me of what they did with in Carthage.
Yeah, it could be. I don't remember if that's just a rumor or if there's proof of it, but what they do say is that whoever managed to hide out and not be found and killed and was left after the William soldiers went back to London was not in any good shape because they had nothing to eat because all the crops and all the animals had been destroyed. And so many, many people died of starvation over that year and the following years.
Hmm.
And when William ordered the Doomsday Book to be prepared, which was a very thorough accounting of all the lands and all the wealth all over England, you
Yeah.
can still tell from that, which is, more than a decade in the future, that there's nothing in this area of the North. Like,
Uh,
it took years. It took more than a decade to begin to recover.
yeah, and you do see the logic where if they just keep rebelling so much and they kind of think they can just keep doing it, you're like, well, I got to do something. Maybe it's a bit extreme, but they're definitely not gonna
Well,
want to
there weren't
rebel.
any more rebellions
Not
after
only will
that
they,
from
I
that
mean, maybe
area.
they still want to, but it's just going to be really hard to actually do it because there's nothing really there.
So I do have something I want to read. Orderic Vitalis, who's a famous chronicler from the period, well, he was writing 50 years later, so he wasn't an eyewitness, but he was generally very supportive of William, except in this particular harrying at the North. He said he could praise William for plenty in other parts of William's life, but he had nothing good to say about this particular incident, and he knew William would have to answer for it before God. Casualty figures cited run over 100,000 dead resulting just from the famine.
Wow. And there's not that
Um,
many people back then. Like even today, that's a lot of people, but there weren't that many
right.
people.
Others don't think that could be true because they say William's army was too small to have physically inflicted such destruction at such a scale, but
Yeah,
it was clear so that the parts of Yorkshire are still recorded as waste in the Doomsday Survey 2 decades later. Land that had been fertile and, you know, used productively before this.
definitely not great. Not great. Uh,
No, and
on a
so
happier topic,
mhm,
apparently around this time, so in 1070, he's in Winchester and he meets with these three sort of priests who've been sent by the Pope or bishops or whatever. And they, they officially crown William during Easter, and this kind of is like the Pope's seal of approval that William is really like officially the king, and not just in terms of the battle side, but also like in the eyes of God, he is the king of England, you know.
okay. And then, back to when Matilda came over and she was crowned as queen in 1068. Again, she spent most of her life in Normandy because whenever William was in England doing these things that we've been talking about, he left Matilda at home in Normandy to reign as the monarch for that area. And
Mm,
everyone believes she did an excellent job. There were no issues about her basically ruling Normandy in his absence. And during this time that Matilda was over here being crowned, they conceived their final child, Henry. He will be Henry the First of England in the future. And then just to talk a little bit about their marriage, we talked a little bit about potentially he beat her up as part of his proposal, and that's how
Oh, right, yeah.
right. And that the Pope didn't agree to the marriage, saying they were too closely related. And it took several years for him, the Pope, to formally accept the marriage. And people think perhaps Matilda and William had to agree to build abbeys in order to get that forgiveness, or at least in honor of being forgiven. And so those are the abbeys where they're both buried today. The Women's Abbey is Trinity in Caen. They're both in Caen, I think it's pronounced
Cane,
Caen
or
in
Caen.
Normandy, and St. Stephen's, which is where William is buried, and they're kind of next to each other. And they're still, again, places that you can go visit today, which are great examples of the architecture of that time.
Okay.
But as examples of the fact that despite the fact that they were frequently apart from one another, um, they had 9 or 10 children that survived. And other than Robert, he seemed to get along with his other children. So it was a close oh, and also William is not known to have been unfaithful to Matilda. Unlike his son Henry, who had at least 17 illegitimate children, William didn't have any illegitimate children. And some people say that was because he hated being a bastard, being called a bastard, and he didn't want to create a bastard
That makes
himself.
sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have, if we want to run through them real quick, so first he has Robert, then he has Richard, then William,
Which
Henry,
we should call William Rufus just to distinguish.
okay, Adeliza or Adelaide, Cecilia, Matilda, Constance, and Adela. And then he might have had someone named Agatha, but we're not very
Yeah,
sure.
yeah, I don't think he really had Agatha. But, you'll notice that, well, you may not recognize it, but the girls are named after Matilda's French royal heritage. So Constance was the name of the French queen, who was Matilda's grandmother. Adela was Matilda's mother, who was a princess, a daughter of a French king.
Hmm,
Then Matilda was named after Matilda herself.
right.
And then, I don't know about Adeliza. Maybe that was a variation of Adela, I'm not sure, but 3
Hmm.
of the girls were named after the French royalty, so it just kind of goes to show. And in Matilda's gravestone, which I may have written down somewhere, but I don't have it in front of me right now, but if you look at the epitaph on her tombstone, she mentions that she's the granddaughter of the French king, so she's still very proud of her French heritage.
Yeah, I mean, it makes sense if you're from there. So yeah, going back to William, so around this time when they're kind of reforming the church after he gets officially crowned by the Pope and everything, he kicks out Stigand and his brother Ethelmar. They get deposed of their bishoprics. So basically, it's like, hey, we got to have more legit, bishops. These guys were never fully, approved. So some other abbots also got deposed, and he also founded Battle Abbey, which was sort of like almost like a memorial to the Battle of Hastings, and it was almost they think like a penance for the deaths that he caused in the battle. Um, and then apparently during Lent of 1070, there was a raid on English monastic wealth, and so they got sent to. Sorry, I'm kind of confused by this.
Yeah, well, I don't know if about it being in 1070, maybe it happened over a few years, but definitely. And I don't know if this happened at the very beginning of his reign, because remember, he was trying to convince the English that not much was gonna change. But definitely, whether it was then or it was after the harrowing of the North, during that early period, he and some other Norman nobility really stole
Mm,
treasure from the English churches and sent it back to the Norman and French churches. And in fact,
right.
Matilda specifically wrote to one abbey or monastery and said she wanted them to send certain things to her. And so they did, and when she received their gifts, she was pissed because they hadn't sent her as much as she expected or exactly what she expected, so she wrote them back and she's like, yeah, this isn't gonna cut it. I want it all," you know? So
Oh,
they did take a lot from the English churches and abbeys and monasteries.
yeah, I'm curious to know more about, like, how they kinda got away with that. Because yeah, it seems like they also used it to pay off mercenaries and just kinda pay off all the war debt and kinda pacify England, use it to help restore England, so, I
Well,
don't
I
know.
mean, I think they definitely donated a lot of it to French and Norman churches and probably sent some back to the Pope, so they carefully
Um,
balanced. They gave enough to the church that
thing,
the
like,
church
we'll
was
give it back to
okay.
the
There's
other
them
church.
using some of it to pay off.
Interesting. I mean, the kings always love to take money out of England and spend it
Yep,
kind of in wars
exactly.
and on French
Just
things.
like the Vikings did, right?
True, true. It is like a little bank in the middle of the ocean.
So
Um,
I wanted to talk a bit about hunting, which seems a little bit odd, but we mentioned that William's second son is Richard. And I kind of like Richard. I don't know why. We don't really know very much about him, but I see him as a nice kid. But he was killed while he was hunting in the New Forest. And
mm,
so that brings, and we'll hear about another of William's children that had a hunting incident in the New Forest in a future episode. So
yeah.
foreshadowing.
Are you gonna tell us about the New Forest, like what that is?
Yes.
Okay, cool.
So hunting was, I don't know, well, the issue of having hunting grounds belong to royalty, be the king's grounds, was more French and Norman than English. So when William came over, he established 21 forests. And when we say forest, we think of all these trees, but it wasn't necessarily treed, or maybe part of it had trees, but a lot of it had more meadow, an area. But he William's favorite hobby was hunting, and a lot of the nobility used hunting as their training for battle because it taught you to
Right.
how to control a horse on the run and how to, use your bow and arrow while you were on the horse and this sort of stuff. But so William um put these areas of England under forest law, and being under forest law was not a good thing for anybody but the king. It imposed basically a kingdom within a kingdom. And if you happened to live in that area that he had decided to make a forest, you were subject to draconian laws about preserving, increasing, protecting the species. And you couldn't, maybe you could no longer farm your own land and you could no longer hunt deer yourself. Only people that were with the king, approved by the king, could hunt the animals that lived in the forest. There were four main animals of the forest: a red deer, fallow deer, a roe, I'm not sure what roe is, and a wild pig. And all of them were called just venison. But the forest law had its own courts, which were the royal courts, and its sole aim was to preserve the venison and the green undergrowth that the venison lived off of for the king's pleasure. You had no right of appeal if you were accused and found guilty of violating the forest law. And William tried to the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle said that William laid down the law that whoever slew a deer will be blinded. He
Oh,
forbade the killing of even hares, rabbits, and of
he wanted them all for
boars.
himself.
Right? So the rich complained and the poor lamented, but he was set on it. So yeah, you would be blinded if you were found to have killed a deer. And
Wow,
he
so it wasn't
just
even like, even outside of his forests, like, you
no,
anywhere in the country, you couldn't kill a
no,
deer.
I think this is the forest law
Oh,
specifically. I'm
oh,
not positive, but I think it's just applying to the 21 forest lands that he created, which
so it's
were
kinda like a
huge.
national it's like a national park sort of
Yeah. Yeah,
situation.
yeah, yeah. But except for the king's pleasure.
Just for the king. Yeah, it's
Right.
what's it called? Yeah, the King's
And he
Park.
justified it by saying, "Oh, look here, this is a charter of Canute." And Canute had similar things, which if he had similar things, then why weren't they already in existence? I don't know.
Right.
I think he was kind of making it up. But
Yeah, you always gotta add
anyway,
some reason. It
Yeah,
is
so
kind of
his
interesting though, because it's obviously him just being selfish and liking hunting, but it
mhm.
did kind of have the side effect, I would think, of almost acting like a nature preserve, where even though you are hunting in it, you're preventing any sort of development or other people from hunting. So it actually probably helped preserve a lot of animals, which is
Yeah,
interesting.
for sure, 'cause he couldn't be out hunting all the time, and since the other people couldn't hunt, then the animals must have had a better opportunity to
Yeah.
populate.
I always kind of love that sort of setting in like a Robin Hood type setting where it's like, oh, we're in the king's forest. We gotta be careful. We don't want to get caught, we have to
Right,
or something.
right.
So yeah, going back to more of the church stuff. So I said at the beginning that he actually kept a lot of the native Anglo-Saxon rulers and clergy, but by this point, um, essentially they'd all been replaced by Norman clergy. There were only two native English bishops that were remaining. So I think just over time, he started maybe getting a little paranoid with all these rebellions and just kind of wanted to have his most trusted men who were also Norman at his side, at his cabinet, I guess. So then this we can't forget about Sven. Apparently, even though Sven had been paid off and promised he would leave England, he returned in early 1070 and he raided along the Humber in East Anglia. And he joined this guy, Hereward the Wake, who was a local ruler. And they captured Peterborough Abbey.
Mm,
And but then William, like always, was able to secure him leaving, probably paid him off a little bit, maybe. And he also had to return back to France, back to Maine, where the town of Le Mans had revolted. And another concern was the death of Count Baldwin the Sixth of Flanders in July 1070, which kind of led to some sort of succession crisis, and that kind of messed him
right,
up.
because remember Count Baldwin was Matilda's father, and then, his eldest son became count after that, and he was still pretty loyal, kept up the relationship with William, but then and I may be getting this a little bit confused, but then another son who was pretty much of an asshole, then I think either murdered or arranged for the murder of his brother and took over as Count of Flanders and was no longer a friend of William and his sister Matilda, but instead sided with the French king against them. So, yeah, that became a thorn on his side ever after.
Interesting.
And he
Yeah.
sent William Fitzauburn, the guy that had been ruling England with Odo, he sent
Mhm.
William Fitzauburn to go put down a rebellion that was happening in Flanders. And so William Fitzosborne sets out basically by himself, thinking this is going to be, some easy task for him. And he ends up getting killed.
Oh, I didn't,
Yeah.
I didn't see that
Yeah.
part. Yeah, apparently then, but on the northern end, in 1071 is when he defeats the last rebellion in the north. This Earl Edwin was betrayed by his own men, and then William built a causeway. Do you know what a causeway is? To subdue the
I
Isle of
don't.
Ely, like a bridge, maybe.
Sounds like a bridge, yeah, or
Yeah, he
some
probably
way to
built
get
a bridge
across.
to
Yeah.
attack this Isle of Ely, which is where Hereward and Morcar were hiding. They thought they could
Well, I
hide.
listened to a podcast, a whole hour-long podcast on just only this battle. And yeah, I mean, it was pretty interesting because the land was hard to get in because it was so boggy. And I think William had a lot of trouble. And one of the men that was fighting against him was quite clever. So it went back and forth for a bit.
Yeah, it sounds like an interesting, like, cinematic kinda situation, like, he's building this bridge to try to get to this little island where his rivals that are hiding, and yeah, so apparently, yeah, that Hereward escapes, but Morcar, gets captured, imprisoned, all that stuff. William then, the next year, invades Scotland, he defeats Malcolm, who had recently invaded the north of England, and William and Malcolm, sign a peace treaty, the Treaty of Abernethy, and Malcolm probably gave up his son Duncan as hostage for this peace. And there's probably another stipulation of the treaty that they made Edgar the Eighthling get. This is when he gets removed from Malcolm's court. So still not killed, but he just gets removed from the court. And then William turns back to the continent. He goes back to Normandy. There's an invasion of Maine by Fulk le Rechine, the Count of Anjou.
Anjou, always Anjou.
Always
Bad
the
guy.
is it Angevins? It's like Angevin.
Yes. Yes, which will later, that's King Henry II is an Angevin.
Mm. So, as William defeats Le Mans and keeps with going on with his campaign in France and secures northern France. But this is when the Count of Flanders has Edgar Atheling in his court. Robert also marries his half sister Bertha to King Philip I of France at this time.
Yeah, and King Philip was not a good husband to old Bertha.
Poor Bertha. Also the name
Guess what? I
Bertha.
think I mentioned this in an earlier episode, but Bertha did give King Philip a son, the future King Louis VI.
Hmm.
Um, but not long after that, Philip had an eye for the Count of Anjou's third wife,
Hmm.
Bertrada, and basically started living in sin with Bertrada. And just so basically, the king stole the Count of Anjou's wife from him, even though Bertrada was still married to Anjou and Philip was still married to Bertha. He sent Bertha away to a monastery, didn't divorce her, but just sent her away. And so the Pope kept excommunicating him, but he didn't care. He just wanted to be with Bertha. I mean,
Yeah, I
Bertrada.
mean, it is an interesting thing. I see like why they would do that because it's like, oh well, they had an epiphany from God and they decided they needed to be, a wife of the Lord as a nun. So like, well, guess I got to remarry. How about Bertrada or whatever? Like, I don't know if he remarried Bertrada, but you know.
Eventually, they did get married, but not for a long time.
So
And interestingly, Philip and Anjou remained allies. So
that is
I
weird.
guess I feel like, well, as I said, I don't like Anjou, and maybe he didn't really care that much. I feel like he had to have gotten something out of it, right? Like, okay, you're going to always side with me against William, or give me a lot of treasure. So I think he had to have gotten something out of the deal to
Right.
give up without a fight.
Yeah, I'm relating to William right now because I feel like the last month I've been traveling all over the place and now William returns to England. This is when he releases his army from service. But then he goes back to Normandy, where he spends all of 1074. He leaves England in the hands of Fitzgilbert and William de Warenne, and this guy Lanfranc.
Lanfranc, who's the new Archbishop of Canterbury.
Hmm.
Just a side note, and
Mm-hmm.
I didn't separately research this, I'm just going by faded memory, but I think if you looked at the Norman nobility at this time that were in England and had been given English lands and was starting to make the Baldwins, the Warrens, etc., that
Yeah.
those names are still the wealthiest landholders in England today.
Well, my good friend's last name is Baldwin, so I got to get in on that. Ooh-ah.
Mhm. Mhm.
So, apparently this is kind of the longest that he's left England. He leaves for an entire year, and it kind of shows that he's feeling secure about England to leave it for that long. And I'm not even gonna, I'm gonna skip everything about Edgar the Eighthling, but this is when he returns to Scotland. And this is when Philip, the French king, he kind of wants to focus the enemies of William. Philip apparently doesn't really like William, so he proposes that Edgar be given the castle of Montreuil-sur-Mer on the Channel, which would have given Edgar a strategic advantage against William. But this doesn't end up happening. William makes that kaput, and
Philip's not a very good warrior.
mm, and so then Philip kind of just focuses on Brittany. Anyway, there's this thing called the Revolt of the Earls. Do you want apparently in 1075, while William's gone, Ralph de Gaulle, Roger de Brutil, and well, sorry, just them two. They just have they're both earls. They kind of conspire against William, and Do you know anything about that?
I don't know anything about
Oh,
this.
interesting. Um, doesn't seem too
Oh,
significant.
is this where Walthegard, Judith's husband, gets beheaded? Or
Basically, all I know is that no one really
yeah,
knows
yeah, yeah. This is
exactly.
what I know about the debate at the
It was
Pearls.
launched
I'm sorry. This is
at
all
a
I know
wedding.
is that there was this revolt, and I know, and so William was somewhat related to Walthegard. It starts with a W. I'm not sure exactly how to pronounce it
Hmm.
because he was married to Judith, and whether or not Walthegard was involved in the rebellion, William kind of saw it as a good opportunity to get rid of the last remaining English earl. He was the last remaining English earl. And I have a chapter in my book about the last remaining English earl, and Adela watches him be beheaded. So,
Yeah.
but there,
So
it doesn't seem like there was like Judith told William that her husband was part of it, but it seems a little bit unclear if maybe Judith just wanted to get rid of him because she didn't like him that much.
okay. Yeah. Did you know it got launched at the wedding of Ralph to a relative of Roger, and yeah, Waltheoff, although he was
Walthioff,
originally one
that's
of
it.
William's favorites, was involved, and some other Breton lords. Ralph also requested Danish aid, but William actually just stayed in Normandy while his men in England subdued the revolt.
I think he was
And
tired of traveling.
yeah, he was like, you know what, you guys can handle it. I trust you guys. I've handled enough rebellions in my day. And yeah, apparently, both Roger and Ralph kind of gets bottled up in their castles and their bases. And apparently, uh, so then Ralph left Norwich in control of his wife and left England for Brittany. Norwich gets besieged and surrenders. And then right after that, the Danish king's brother Canute finally arrives in England with a fleet of 200 ships, but Norwich
Wow.
had already surrendered. So things could have actually turned differently. Like William would have been
Yeah,
like, "Oh my God, I should have gone over there. Like this is actually
right.
horrible." So anyway, the Danes just kind of return home. William does return to England to kind of deal
It's
with it.
interesting if they had 200 ships, why not just go ahead
Just go
and
for it. I'd be like, all
launch an
right, so let's
attack,
let's
right?
try. Yeah, that you would think. Um, so yeah, William returns and leaves Matilda in charge of Normandy, and he deals with it kind of around Christmas time. Roger and Waltheof were kept in prison, and yeah, then Waltheof was executed in May 1076. And then their Earl Ralph had secured control of the castle at Dal, and William. So this is in Brittany. So he goes right. We said he escaped to Brittany. Now William's in Brittany. He sieges the castle. Um, King Philip apparently relieves the siege and defeats William at the Battle of
Yeah,
Dal. So
this
a
is the
rare
first
defeat.
battle that William lost since maybe, I mean, I don't know if it's the first battle he ever lost or if it's the first battle he lost since he was like a young teenager.
Yeah, so that is a surprise to hear. We've been hearing about so much victory, and he is finally defeated, but it takes a lot. And so he retreats to Normandy, but it didn't really change much. Even though it is a defeat, it doesn't really change the trajectory too much. And an Angevin attack on Maine was defeated. And then this was when Simon de Crepy retires. He was the Count of Amiens.
Okay, so he may or may not have been engaged to Adela, who was much younger than him, but Simon was raised in William's court. And I think William really liked Simon. And the reason Simon was important is because his father controlled the Vexin. The Vexin is some land that's between Normandy and France and was constantly being fought over. So when Simon's father died and Simon inherited this quite valuable, crucial kind of chest piece, William was excited, right? Because his good buddy that grew up in his court is going to be in charge of this important land.
Right.
And he argued, some people say he betrothed Simon to Adela, but Simon said, I've got to go on a pilgrimage to Rome because to make sure my father is forgiven or something, because his father had done some horrible thing, right? So Simon sets out for Rome and does talk to the Pope, but then some reason ends up, and it also had, so meanwhile, King Philip is also like, oh, I can't have Simon be in charge of the Vexen because Simon is buddies with William, my biggest enemy. So Philip was trying to negotiate with the Pope and Simon during this time as well. And for some reason, I can't remember all the complications, but
Hmm.
Simon decided to randomly marry this other person, not Adela,
Hmm.
and to join the monastery. And this woman that he married joined the nunnery. So I don't think they ever even consummated their marriage. I don't know why they did get married, but they immediately went and became celibate and became, you know, followers of
Nuts.
God or whatever. And that gave Philip control of the Vexen.
Wow. So does he ever get it back, or then France kind of permanently
I
keeps
mean,
it?
they would fight back and forth over it, but I think mostly it was in France
I guess
after that.
eventually France will get it because England
Right.
doesn't have it anymore. So then this is probably something you're interested in, because this is also when William starts to have some trouble with his eldest son, Robert.
Right.
And this guy, this historian who keeps coming up, Orderic Vitalis, wrote about this. And he says that it started with a quarrel between
Yeah.
Robert and his younger brothers, William and Henry. What do you think
Yeah,
about
I
that?
have. Oh, yes. I think many sources talk about this, and I think it's true. So they were, I think they were in this area. The town is called L apostrophe Aigle. I'm not sure how to pronounce it. But the man who was in charge, the Castilian of that castle, had opposed William in the past, and this was supposed to be, I'm going to go here to show that I've forgiven him. And oh, also they were trying to plan an attack on Maine, and this was on the way to Maine. So anyway, for some reason, William and Matilda and some of the family were staying in one castle, this man William's castle, but Robert with his companions was staying nearby. And one day, William Rufus, his younger brother, and Henry, the youngest, said, "Oh, I'm going to go visit. Let's go visit Robert." Well, William Rufus and Robert did not get along. I think as soon as Richard, the brother that was between them in age, died
Hmm.
in that hunting accident, I thought William Rufus said, "Hey, wait a minute. Robert may have been named heir to Normandy all those years ago, but he hasn't been named heir to England. And so I
Right.
see a way to talk myself into that role now that Richard's out of the way." So William Rufus was always brown nosing his dad, and I think he
Mm.
was most like his father. He was his namesake and everything. And I think William Rufus was just always against Robert. Anyway, so William and Henry go over to this castle where Robert was, and they climbed up to the top room and they were playing around or whatever. And Robert and his companions were underneath doing whatever, practicing with the bow and arrow or just hanging out and talking and drinking ale or something. And next thing you know, Henry and William Rufus dumped a chamber pot of piss on their brother and his companions. So obviously, hugely insulting and
Right.
embarrassing and humiliating. So Robert and his companions start like marching up the stairs to go attack their brothers, and there was a big fight. And I'm a little confused about how far, if William happened to be there at the same time, because anyway, somebody got news to William that your sons are about to kill each other, and he managed to go break up the fight. But what he didn't do was punish William Rufus or Henry. He basically just laughed it off and was like, boys will be boys.
Which I
And
could see
that,
someone kind of even doing that in 2026.
yeah,
It's like, oh,
probably.
it
But
was just a
also,
prank.
you got to appreciate how humiliating it was for the
No, that's
eldest son,
true. That's
too.
probably right. I couldn't really imagine that. I guess the version today would be like, oh, we were filming a TikTok and we like dumped like ice water on our older brother. But yeah, dumping pee on someone is like
I mean,
pretty across the line. Like that crosses the line.
arguably, it wasn't pee, it was dirty water. I mean, no one's exactly sure, but in my mind, in my chapter I'm writing, William, Rufus, and Henry are having a pissing contest to see who can get their pee into this container, along with some of their friends and everything. And then that's the container that they end up
There's
dumping, but
something
who
about
knows?
this scene because I've heard about this before, I think probably from you, and all this stuff obviously is gonna remind me of Game of Thrones, but there's something about this scene that really I can picture, like, the characters and one's up here and there's something about it where I can really picture this happening, and it's like, one of the little kids doing it to Jon Snow, and Jon Snow's like, "Hey, don't do that," like, and he's kind of like
Right,
a corny guy, and you kinda feel bad
right.
for him.
Yeah. So William and William, Rufus, and Henry all go back to where William was staying and leave Robert with his companions all super pissed off. And then the next day, someone messenger comes to William the Conqueror and says, bad news and good news. Your son and his companions tried to capture Rouen, which was the
Right.
capital of Normandy. So Robert and his companions had raced to Rouen in an attempt to take over Normandy and finally claim this inheritance he had been given so long ago. But even though he got into the city, the Castellan of the castle of Rouen was able to fight him off. And so Robert knew he was in trouble now because he hadn't managed to capture the castle. So he and his companions fled to Flanders, his mom's
Classic.
homeland,
Mhm.
where that guy we were just talking about, where the count was kind of siding with the French king. So now
Mhm.
all of a sudden, the French king and the Count of Flanders are joined by the heir to Normandy, Robert, insultingly called Curthose by his father, which
But
means
that's
short legs.
That's a pretty strong alliance. You could see how they're feeling powerful.
Yeah, and the French king gave Robert castles, and for several years, he and his companions raided into Normandy. And meanwhile, Matilda didn't she didn't encourage the rebellion, but she also wanted to help her son because she didn't want him to be killed by her husband. And so she sent funds to Robert. At a minimum, she sent him money to help sustain him against William's direct order not to do anything of the sort. And when William found out that she had done it, he didn't, well, some people argue he did attack Matilda. I don't think that's true, but he did go after her messenger
Don't attack
and
the messenger.
right, tried to kill the messenger, but the messenger got warned and was able to flee to a monastery and seek sanctuary, and that's the only reason that he survived. And ever after this, it obviously created big issues in his relationship with Matilda because William felt Matilda had, committed not well, Robert had
Like a
committed treason,
betrayal.
right? Trying to steal the thing, and the fact that Matilda would side with him instead of with William cut him to the core, and he never trusted her again. He never left her as regent again. Instead, he put either Odo or one of the other men in charge.
I think that's always gonna be a tough, choice between your husband and your eldest son, that's very dramatic.
Right.
Speaking,
Yeah.
I'm a little biased here.
I would always choose you,
Oh,
Austin.
that's very kind. So, then I guess right after that, King Philip William drives them out of how do you pronounce it? Remila or something? Where
I
they
don't
are?
know.
Oh, well, you said it before in Normandy.
Rouen. Oh, Rouen.
And so then King Philip gives them a castle at Gerberoy, where they
Okay.
get joined by some more supporters. William then sieges Gerberoy. I mean, William must have been in such good shape. He's just constantly fighting.
Right.
And obviously so then apparently the forces, sneak out of the castle and they take the besiegers and William by surprise, and this is when William is unhorsed by Robert and is only saved from death by an Englishman, Toki, son of Wigod, who seems very, Nordic
Right.
sounding to me.
Right, but so remember, William had lost this battle at Dole, a few years before, but otherwise, William seemed invincible and was definitely the most powerful knight on the continent and in England. And Robert was young and didn't really have a reputation established yet, although, he's always had a reputation as a good soldier. But everyone assumed, including Matilda, when William and William Rufus set out to Gerberoy to to besiege the castle there, the assumption was they would capture Robert fairly easily. So I think it was in December or January that this happened, and it was very rare that you would fight a battle in the winter. So there was a lot of surprising things about the father and son, the fighting in the dead of winter, and the fact that you would 100% expect William to win the battle, but they were surprised. And in the fight, like you were saying, Robert unhorsed William, arguably not knowing that it was his father at the time, but I
He
think
knew. I
that he
think
did
he
know it was his
probably knew.
father.
Why would he not know?
But as you said, it was an Englishman who sacrificed himself and gave up his own horse so that William could get on another horse and ride away, because they had cut the horse down underneath William, and he wasn't going to be able to run in that armor fast enough to get away. He had to be on a horse. So he was injured. I think his arm was injured, and William Rufus was injured as well, but they did manage to get away.
Pretty big moment. I feel like we haven't heard about, and I don't think we will hear about too many times when the heir is fighting the king, is fighting their dad, and in a straight up battle against them. Yeah, but they do reach an accommodation where William once more affirms that Robert will receive Normandy. And
Well, I also just remember how humiliated William is, right? To lose one of the few battles in your life and to lose it to your son. He had to have been humiliated, but Matilda and other nobility convinced them that, look, if you've got a lot going on, you need to bring this to an end and reconcile. So they did reconcile. I think Matilda had a huge part in doing that, as well as Simon, the guy you mentioned earlier. Simon helped broker the compromise as well. And the reason I emphasize this is because the compromise held briefly. And in fact, Adela's betrothal to Count Stephen Henry was used as the occasion to formally show that William and Robert were together and the family was all together again. Because if
Mhm.
they looked like a family that was splintered, that really weakened their stance everywhere. Like, the
Yeah.
other Norman nobility, the French king, other people could be like, oh, there's like a vulnerability we can take advantage of. So
Well, yeah,
they knew.
exactly. Yeah, that does happen. And, up in the north, this is when King Malcolm in Scotland raids south of the River Tweed. He devastates the land. He raids it for about a month. And then when the Normans respond, it seems to cause the Northumbrians to get even more kind of rebellious in response. And so William dispatches his half brother Odo to deal with this rebellion. He leaves Normandy in 1080. And then Robert gets sent on a campaign, this campaign against the Scots as well. So it's almost like, all right, you were fighting me. Now you got to help me out against these Scots.
Right.
And Robert raided and it says Lothian. And he forces Malcolm to agree to terms. He builds a new castle at Newcastle upon Tyne, and a papal embassy arrives in England during this period, asking that I guess William do fealty for England to the papacy, but William rejects this. I don't know exactly what that means, but he sort of rejects the Pope a little bit.
Well, this is kind of the beginning stages of this investiture crisis where the Pope decides we need to have more power and tries to take some power that the kings had traditionally held. Like
Mm,
we said, William replaced Stigard with Longfranc.
yeah,
And the Pope's like, well, why are the kings choosing the archbishop? The
right.
archbishop should be chosen by the Pope. So it continues a quite a lengthy time period of um,
Conflict.
tension between the church and the royalty about who has power to do what.
Which basically never ends. So then I guess William visits Wales around this time, and there's some disagreement on why he visited, but the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle states it was a military campaign, but Welsh sources say it's a pilgrimage to St. David's in honor of St. David. but it seems like it was probably more a military thing. Um, so then he squashes a rebellion in Maine. And now we're kind of in his last years as we're hitting the hour mark on the podcast.
Mhm.
So,
So
um,
he's getting well, first of all, Matilda dies, and, she had quite a drawn out death. We don't know if she died from dysentery or there was, typhoid or something going around at the time. But I
on the
think
lettuce.
all of this, yeah, no, all of this conflict between her son and her husband also tore on her, and also the fact that she was no longer able to serve as regent. I'm sure that was hurtful. So she had a lot of stress going on. Anyway, she lingered, but William was at her deathbed, and he was devastated by her death and never really kind of recovered from that. But also, as soon as Matilda was out of the picture, Robert rebelled again and was in rebellion through the rest of William's life. So the deal that Matilda brokered couldn't stand once Matilda was no longer in the picture. And so William was not fighting. I guess it sounds like he's fighting just as much, but for whatever reason, in addition to fighting, he's also eating and drinking
Mm,
because he kept gaining a lot of weight. And so he was getting heavier and heavier. And some people say that King Philip of France mocked William for it and reportedly joked that the King of England was lying in at Rouen, which meant like a pregnant woman does a lie in. So he
oh,
was basically saying William was so fat he looked pregnant.
interesting.
And William did not take that very well. So he got on his horse and took off for what I think the land that he took off for was in the Vexin that we talked about. So he raised an army and he marched on the French town of Mont. Yeah, it is in the Vexin. And in retaliation for this insult, and he was burning and pillaging and destroying the town. And while he was doing that, because the town was on fire, his horse reacted to a flame that came close and kind of um, jolted him. And because his belly was so big, it slammed the pommel of the saddle into his stomach so hard that it burst his intestines.
Wow.
Yeah. And so he was in quite a bit of pain. And, yet he did not die on the spot. He was, carried back to, I think, Caen, Kaen, where his
Hmm.
but maybe Rouen first. Anyway, he lingered for 6 weeks. It must have been a very painful 6 weeks because, they didn't have pain meds, and he's probably dying of sepsis. Um, so as he was lingering, he used the time to distribute large sums of money to the church and to the poor and forgiveness of his sins, etc. He actually sent compensation to the town of Mont that he had destroyed so that they could use his money to rebuild what he had just burned. Um, he, as I said, expressed regret for the harrowing of the North, and he tried to settle, who was going to succeed him as the Duke of Normandy and the King of England, and he didn't want Robert to be able to have any of them because Robert was in open rebellion against him.
Right. So even after all that, when he was helping against Scotland, he still then turns back against his dad
Yeah.
again.
Right, but, we don't know what William did to provoke it. Again, William probably promised him, "Yeah, you can have Maine or you can have some of these power," and then still didn't give it to him. And at the same time, Robert's companions were constantly egging him on about it because if Robert didn't have any power or any money, he didn't have any money or power to distribute to his followers. So his followers were like wanting him to have it so that they could have some. 'Cause Robert was notoriously generous with what little he did have, so anyway, I don't know whose fault it was probably fault on both sides, but yeah, so William's like, "Screw you, I'm not gonna let you have anything," but a lot of the nobility, came and said, "Look, we already gave homage to Robert, we have been doing for years as, our duke, and it's just gonna be big problems if we now change who it's gonna be, so just give Robert what he's been promised his whole life." So he reluctantly agreed that Robert could be Duke of Normandy, but since he had never promised England to anyone, he gave England to his now second son, William Rufus. And he said to William Rufus, go quickly and secure the throne before somebody else can.
Mm.
So Rufus wasn't there when William died because he had quickly gone off to England to secure the crown there. And then Henry was there, but he had no land to give Henry. He had already given Normandy and England away. And so he just gave, I think, 5,000 pounds to Henry and said, here's some money. So he was called Henry the Landless at the time. Yeah.
I mean, was it,
And
I guess normally the king's sons, they all had some land?
no, Henry didn't have any land. His mother,
Right.
in her
But
will, had given some land to Henry that was based in England, but he didn't really have use of it yet. He will
but I'm
later go and ask his
yeah.
brother, William Rufus, for it, but he never gets it.
That was kind of rare at the time that if you were a prince, you got some land. You weren't just given money. If he's calling Henry the
Oh, I
Land.
see what you're saying. Well, it wasn't established that everything went to the oldest son yet, so it still was a case where often things were divided. But I don't know that it was unusual. I mean, when you have multiple sons, that at some point you only have so much land to give. But Henry definitely wanted land because land is power. Money can disappear, but the land remains unless, you lose it in a battle. So
Right.
Henry was not happy with only having money, but I don't know that it was that he should have expected to have more.
All right. So I do have kind of quite a bit that I am going to skip over, but our next week's episode, we're going to do Adela, a special
Mhm.
Adela episode, and it is going to be all about her, but I might mention a couple last things about William, like the Domesday Book. I have some more about
Oh,
that.
yeah, the Doomsday Book is important. We should mention that, yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, just quickly, it's basically just that he does a survey, and it's kind of one of the first surveys of its kind, and it gives us a lot of good information nowadays. That's why, you feel like I hear about it all the time. You always hear about the
Mhm.
Domesday Book, and I think what I heard the reason they called it that was because it sort of reminded the peasantry, the English people, excuse me, the English people of kind of God taking stock of everything before the end of the world. It sort of just felt like,
Yeah,
all right,
I think
wow, like
that's
they were just so unused to having everything counted. Like they're just used to living their life on the farm. They pay their taxes. Maybe there's a battle that happens nearby or something like that. But they weren't used to quite this level of, hey, how's it going? Like, how many pigs do you have? How many cows do you have? How many, how many chickens do you have? All that kind of stuff. And they kind of felt like they were, it was like the end of the world. Like, whoa, it's like when Noah's Ark, they're putting out two of each animal on the boat.
right. I'm sure that a lot of the wealthy people didn't like it because now, like, they couldn't avoid people were gonna know exactly how much they had and therefore exactly how
Hmm.
many taxes they owed, which was the point of it.
Exactly. Right.
But yeah, it turns out to be, of course, invaluable for historians, but I think it was helpful for years of ruling. But I just want to quickly talk about
Yeah.
his lingering death. As
Yeah.
soon as he actually did die, everyone immediately left the room and the people stripped his clothes off of him, took everything of value and just left him there nude.
Oh my
And
god.
so you have this really powerful person who's really treated with disrespect once he's dead because people ran off to secure William Rufus runs off to secure the throne and other nobility that were there ran off to secure their lands because they weren't sure, is Robert going to be angry that he didn't get England? And so there's going to be, so everyone just went up after their own interests. And it fell to a single minor knight, just some like newbie knight who wasn't important at all, who at his own initiative and his own expense had to arrange for William's body to be washed, embalmed, and prepared for burial. So William didn't leave enough instructions about preparing his body for burial, and no one else did it. So it was pretty undignified. And I was actually asked by an English woman that I know who doesn't like William the Conqueror, like, "Oh, isn't it proof that he was a horrible person, that he didn't even have anyone willing to pay for his embalmment except some random guy?" And I said, in part, I think it was because of what I just said about people were running to secure their own thing. And I said, I think because he died in Normandy, that was more likely to happen. I feel like if he had died in England, that he would have been treated with more respect. Even though the English hated him, I think that they had a sense of protocol and how royalty was to be treated, that they wouldn't have treated him that way despite not liking him, but we'll never know. And then his body was taken to Cannes for burial at the Abbey of St. Stephen. And by the time, though, um, first of all, during his funeral procession, a fire broke out in the town, just like there was that fire at his coronation, remember? So there's
Right,
always
that's
big
funny.
fires around him.
Yeah.
And then at the funeral, before the actual burial, in the middle of it, some random man stood up and started complaining that the abbey had been built on his land and he hadn't been reimbursed for it. And he was like holding up the funeral and claiming he was owed all this money. So like Henry had to go off and deal with that. Henry was the only of their children that was actually at the funeral. And then because his body had been swollen from weeks of decomposition while someone, no one's embalming him,
Yeah.
and because he had gained so much weight, it turns out he couldn't fit into the stone sarcophagus that he had had built for his body. So they're
Right.
trying to stuff him in, and it's like squeezing him into this unforgiving stone, and his body burst open
So gross.
and it really stunk to high heaven. Like people were gagging and were sickened and like were fleeing out of the church. So again, it's so much like what happened at his official crowning as king.
It is funny, yeah, it's almost like he sort of has the ideal reign where he's really powerful, he wins almost every battle, and, but yeah, his coronation and his death are like the most anti, nobility type, situation that you would really
Right?
have.
Yeah.
Yeah,
But
it's
that's it.
not like a King Arthur situation, yeah. So then after his death, apparently his tomb was disturbed several times since 1087. The first was in 1522 when the grave was opened on orders from the papacy. Is that, you think, when they made whatever this
Yeah,
painting
and then
is
they
at
made a
that time?
drawing of based on his bones, which
I
we
don't know
think
why I'm
is the
not.
most realistic. Maybe we'll put it on our Instagram because it's none of
Yeah, I
those
had it
that you're
before. I don't know
showing.
where it went.
I have it, but I don't know how to put it
No, it's
on
all right.
here. So,
Um, and then
and that's how they found out that how tall he was and everything. I think 5'11".
and the intact body was restored to the tomb, but in 1562, so 40 years later, during the French Wars of Religion, the grave was reopened and the bones were scattered and lost, with the exception of one thigh bone. And this lone relic was reburied in 1642 with a new marker. Um, and then the tomb was again destroyed during the French Revolution and was eventually replaced with the current ledger stone.
Which is at the Abbey of St. Stephen.
Right. So, William, this has been a two-part episode, and even this second part alone is literally the longest episode we've ever recorded by far, an hour and 12 minutes, but makes sense. And it also, I'm very glad we split it in two, and we might have to do this again for some of these other really major kings, because there's even more we could have talked about. But, you know, I think we've already kind of reflected on his legacy quite a bit. I don't know if there's too much more to say. It's almost so big that it's hard to really talk too much about, or overemphasize, but it was a big deal. His reign was definitely a big deal. Is there any last thoughts you have about William?
He was a complicated man, I think.
Much like Odysseus.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. We keep bringing up Odysseus lately.
I know, it's on my
Um,
mind. Yeah,
yeah, I mean, I think he definitely had a beautiful daughter that is amazing, and both, it's interesting because we'll hear a little bit later that his son Henry is quite ruthless, and his son Robert was quite chivalrous, and so it's, I guess all children are always different. But anyway, I think he was an interesting, complicated person that I would like to be on his good side, and then that would be fun. And I would not want to be on his bad side.
definitely. And I guess more of like a historical perspective on him, some different perspectives. So apparently, This French guy, William of Poitiers, wrote very glowingly of William's reign and its benefits, but in the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, he's condemned pretty harshly. And apparently, during the reign of Queen Elizabeth I, the Archbishop Matthew Parker kind of had this idea that the conquest corrupted a purer English church. So he kind of, this guy at least, felt like the pre-Norman English church was more like pure Christianity, and now it started getting corrupted all the way back in 1085 or whatever we're talking about. And then apparently during the 17th and 18th centuries, some people kind of started seeing William's reign as like this moment when like the Norman yoke was put onto the Anglo-Saxons. Like I feel like they almost see it as like sort of a colonization type situation. So
But
it's a
I
little
mean, the
conflicting.
Anglo-Saxons did the same things to the Brits,
It's
and
true.
etcetera. So
I
it's
think
just
that's very true. I think the weird thing is that they did it so well, I guess, that like there aren't that many native Britons.
right,
But that basically there were though. That was the Irish and the Welsh, and they always kind of hated the English no matter what. I
right.
did hear a theory somewhere that King Arthur was or no, what was it? It was that it's kind of a weird theory, but it's basically saying that there really wasn't that much of this takeover by the Anglo-Saxons, but just over time, people kind of just forgot the history. And for some reason, the people more to the east started just identifying more with like the Germanic people and the Nordic people, and the Western people just started thinking of themselves more as like the original English. But anyway, that's just another theory.
Yeah.
I'm
But
very
I
tired. This,
mean,
chainmail is making me quite hot.
okay.
It's warming my
I
brain. So,
Yeah, as we said at the beginning, there's so many English words have their origin in French because of William. So many of the landowners that are wealthy in England today came over with the Norman Conquest or because of the
yeah.
Norman Conquest. William's blood still runs through the royal family. So I feel like, he had a lot of important things. Also, he was a good I mean, he left in place the good parts of how the England was being ruled, and he brought over some good parts from France and Normandy as far as administration and management, and his son Henry the First will really kind of carry that forward, but I think that they had a good administrative way of ruling that, advantaged England.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's almost kind of impossible to imagine like an alternate history where William doesn't conquer because it's just so long ago and it has such a big impact that anything we think about England today just wouldn't be the case. Like it would just be a
Yeah.
totally different country. So it's almost kind of pointless to even think about. But big deal, and I'm excited. Next week will be our first, actually, besides last episode, Edgar Eighthling, it'll be our first episode about a non-ruler, a non-king.
Right.
Um,
She is, however, as I mentioned, the daughter of a king, the sister of two kings, and the mother of a king of England. So we have talked about queen mothers before, we just haven't given them a special episode. So
and then I guess after her, we will then do William
William Rufus.
Rufus. Um, okay, sounds good. Well, that has been another episode of the Rain Check podcast. Thank you for your patience. It's been a little bit of a later episode. As I said, I've been traveling a lot, but we should be back on schedule, and we brought you back the longest episode yet. So enjoy, luxuriate in the episode, and follow us on all social media. Until next time.
Au revoir.
In this case, it actually is appropriate. Bonsoir.
Okay.